All right, I'm getting ready to do an underpainting, which is also called a wash drawing. It's going to be done in one color. I'm using burnt umber. I could use many things, but that's what I'm using today. I've selected a handful of brushes. I have many, but I'm just going to use a couple of bigger brushes. This is Liquid in this container. It's a fast drying medium, and I'm going to be using an odorless turpenoid is the name of it. It's an odorless turpentine. It's in this small little container which I will wash my brushes in. So let's set this up. This is my rolling palette, and I have several of these that I use for my painting. And this is my little station, how I work. And this is called a tabaret when you set up something that is your little workstation, how you do things. So this is the medium, this is the thinner, and that's the paint, and that's all I'm using, one color on this piece of artwork. So my canvas has already been toned here. It is a color that is going to be a part of the subject that I'm going to use. I'm going to use 3 or 4 different photos. A grandson had taken with his GoPro, he had taken some shots down in the Keys of underwater mangrove roots, very murky type water. That's why I have this color versus blue or transparent. That's the look of what I'm going to work off of. I've got several photos that I'm going to combine and I'm going to arrange. And then I have a son-in-law who actually caught the fish. So it's a big red fish that's coming through these mangroves, and he's going to be chasing a mud crab, which will be down into the bottom. That's the concept that I'm going to work off of. My first order of business is to get the wash drawing on the canvas. 2 things I'm beginning to do. Didn't talk about it at the beginning either. Down here there's a napkin. I have that on purpose because I'm wiping my brush to the desired amount of fluid I want on the brush. There's a lot of sensitive control with painting. This method of painting, you're controlling the thinness, the thickness, the wetness, the dryness. All those things are essential. Another thing is I hold in my hand another paper towel, and I'm going to even further adjust how much I want on, how much I want to take off. I told you before we weren't really defining anything with sharp edges. I'm now beginning to come back, and I'm going to start determining where the roots go and where the shadows are going to go. This sand here is still a bit wet. I'm going to soften it down. I'm going to try to get it on here where I've got a little bit of light and dark variety in it. But I'm going to start putting some shapes in the sand. You can see this one is beginning to come right here where there's depth. But it's not a flat ground. There's shape on this ground. There's light that's filtering down, hitting in between the mangroves, hitting on to the bottom of the floor of the Gulf there. There's a light coming out this hole. This is that movement I was telling you about that I'm working on. But anyway, when I'm done with this, you still get that one major big feel of dark here. I was telling you about this big pattern, and we're shooting out to the light. I've left this light on purpose, tried not to paint too much of it out. And as soon as I get this one section done in this one top section, I'm going to go on further to a little bit more definition. As it dries, you can come back and then begin to put darker values on it, or a darker, more heavy, actually it's only one value is brown, but you can put a heavier brown umber on it, and as it begins to dry, you have to know that. You have to feel it. It'll dry, and as this whole process dries out, you're actually then refining and shaping, and almost like I said, I feel like a sculptor sometimes, like I'm sculpting this out in one color. All right, you can see now that it's beginning to take a little bit more definite shape. I started out extremely loose. I'm still working very, very loose. However, there is a time limit, and you'll have to find that out. It's pretty hard for me just to explain the exact minutes, but you have to feel it. And each piece of canvas and each person's canvas is probably going to be different depending on how it's toned. You can see this tonal background when you look at the picture. Why I use this color is because it's going to pick up all the lighter elements in this particular painting, and it gives me a way to look at the shapes and the shadows a lot quicker than if that was a white background and I had to determine this color and the darker brown colors. I'm using brown on this. Sometimes I'd use different colors for my underpainting, but the reason I'm using brown is because, again, it's murky water and it has, these roots are brown, and so it has that kind of quality. So between that yellowish green and that brown, just by this one monochromatic painting, I've almost got pretty much the essence of the piece up. When I finish this one piece and get out of here what I want as far as the strength of the design of this one piece, I will then pull up the next photo and show you how I'm going to add more roots in here. Then I'll get down to my main subject, which is going to be the fish and the light, and then ultimately the crab. You can see now that I'm building a lot more intensity into the darker areas. But I'm also going to start picking up some of the seaweed and some of the design, because this is the patterns up in here. For example, these are mangrove that are refracted by the light. You're looking up again at the underneath the water, which is this top area. So all that little design, I'm not going to necessarily try to get every part of that detail in now. A lot of that be picked up in color. I do want to get the feeling of it before I leave this one photograph and go on to the next piece. That's some of those techniques I was talking about with lifting. When you get enough paint on, you can actually do that. But it is part of the design, especially this area right here. I'm having a great time with it. I've come back now, I've been building, I'm building into these shadows, and you can add layers and layers on top of your paint if you don't over brush them. I'm just going to get them on because if you do, you'll wind up lifting the solvent in here will attack the wet paint that's down there. But so this is another technique I'm working on, is just trying to layer and keep building as it's drying. And again, I said again, it's that drying you'll have to feel out so you know how it dries and where it dries. But it's going to be real important. I'm going to start picking up some of the highlights that I really did like in here before the paint dries. If it dries, it's going to be darker. And I want to get it back to the lighter area because it helps me adjust this painting where I want it at. That's a light that's hitting down from the top. There's another one up in here that I'm specifically wanting to catch. But this is the time to do it when it's still wet enough. You can still shape it, you can still work on it. Once it starts drying, you won't be able to do this. And it will eventually dry. Mine's already getting kind of heavy, I can feel it. But I can still move around on it. You see how that does? So once I've got this into all of my movement, and I've got my patterns, the weight of it, I'm building intensity into this area. I'm going to keep on working over here to build that area into light. I'm probably going to have to do some wiping out of here, cleaning some of that out. I want to keep that very, very, very light up in here. And your eye, by the way, is going to be drawn to the light. That's a principle. That's a critical principle in painting. Your eye is drawn to the light. The reason this whole arrangement to me is powerful because not only are you looking up to the top of the water from underneath, you're looking down. So there's a broad range of movement and your eye is shooting through this hole. And that's an important dimensional arrangement for how to handle space. But you feel like you kind of really feel like you're sort of under here, down there as a fish yourself. And that's the feeling of getting intimacy in a painting, is that you got eye-to-eye contact. Now, this was the photo from before.
So I've utilized most from here that I want to do right now. I still have some details down in here that I really like. I'll bring that in. But I want to make sure I'm considering the bigness of the mangrove roots now. And these are the ones I really like as they protrude and refract off this water from the top. So there's this bend. I like the feeling of that extends out. I've got to get this redfish behind here, coming in here. I got to do it while this is still wet before this dries, because I won't be able to get my redfish in equally as well. Again, remember I was talking about composing, and I'm arranging several different photographs together. I've looked at these for months and thought about them and thought about them. And so what comes to my mind as far as design elements are these different things I've been talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and work a few roots in here, then I'll come back and show you how the fish is going to come in here. Now, I've already used what I wanted to use off of that second photo, so now I've gone on to the redfish, which is really the big major subject in the painting to begin with, and the rest is the environment that he's set up into. So I've really set the scene pretty well already, and now I just need to have my redfish curling around. That's why one of those other longer mangroves in. I'll use those from the back. We'll create some dimension. It's what's called overlap. When one thing overlaps another, it creates this illusionary depth of field, which is what I've needed. This big redfish right now, once I get him in, then I'll go on to the mud crab. Yeah, so see, he's swooping around, coming back, and I've got to have this crab in here somewhere. I'm not sure where I want to have him. Now I could continue to paint this underpainting as refined as it possibly could be, but for the sake of this demonstration, I just want to show you that I've got the design in, I've got the movement in, the arrangement, I've used the pictures. I'm getting ready to put the last guy in. That's this mud crab, and he's got his claws up in the air. This redfish is, the redfish eat mud crabs, so he's going to be underneath here. My placement of him is the last thing in this painting that I'm going to be putting in, realizing that he is about to get eaten. So that's the drama that's going on here, with the intensity of the darks to the lights, and also to the movement and the arrangement, and to the natural predator that's getting ready to get his dinner. So I'll get this in, and then basically I'm going to wrap up this piece of work for the day. Now the mud crab is going to be the closest thing into the painting, so even though he's very small, he'll look a little bit bigger, and I'll have to work on adjusting him ultimately by the time I'm finished. Mud crab is kind of a complicated guy to paint. Main thing is I've got my elements together for to make this painting successful, and that is mainly what I wanted to show you today, was how you put these parts together and compose them simultaneously into one entire piece of work, rather than all the sketches and the drawings trying to figure out how it works. So that's a combination of using a classical understudy, or a classical wash drawing, in this case is the terminology we'll use, in one monochromatic color, and with all of the wet into wet painting techniques, that's almost like doing a watercolor. Now when that dries, I'm ready for success to build on that. Normally what we would do if you were teaching in more of an academic setting and you had a lot of time, which we don't. If you had a lot of time, you would do, this is a pencil sketch, and it's called a value study. I've not only proportionally put, arranged and put together my piece of work, but I've done it with value, lights and darks. Now, how to understand a value, in painting we have 9 values from black to white. That's a value study.
and this is done in pencil, which would be considered black and white. So it's monochromatic, picks up a lot of these values. When we're getting ready to do what we're getting ready to do with the wash drawing, we're going to be only using a brown, which would in value come somewhere up in this area. It doesn't go as far as the black does, but it still gives us a lot of range from transparent. It won't be white, it'll be transparent on the canvas to whatever the tonal background is, all the way up to the brown. I'll show you how that kind of works in color. There's the pencil sketch of this piece of work. I toned the canvas for this one for particular reasons, because I was using a very limited amount of colors and I needed the blue, but specifically it's still toned. It's not a white canvas. That is my painted wash study, but it's done in black, not brown. See how that works? That's the painted underpainting. Now when that dries, I came back with a very limited amount of colors, very limited. Matter of fact, there was only 2 in black and white. And it came back, and here's the painting now. So there's the understudy. Now there's the painting that finishes. And this is called a limited palette, so it's very warm. But it was something that we were exploring, how color works and value together. But you see the concept. Academically, that's the way we would tackle it. We don't have the time to do the academics, but by doing the wash study, we are doing classical study, but we're going to do it in a very contemporary method, and it's called getting it on there. And that's what we're going to do. It's a very fast method of painting. Let me show you one more. Here's an understudy that was done not with brown, but with alizarin crimson and black. And so when you put black and alizarin crimson together on a gray tonal background, it almost has the feeling of a brown wash drawing. So anyway, there's lots of ways to do this, a lot of methods. I just wanted to show you that the art of it and the difficult part of it is right here. Once you've accomplished this and you've put everything in place, you have time to wipe things out, clean things up. It's almost like doing a watercolor. When this dries, you can build on it. Your painting, you're going to build more and more and more successful as you put color on your painting. You're not going to wonder if I got this in the right place or that in the right place. You've already done it right here. That's the ingeniousness about this concept. It was a painting I did for the Florida citrus industry. I was a guest artist for it, and we were going to auction off a painting. I wanted to pick up a piece of an idea or a concept of Florida's history, some of its heritage. And this is called Picking from the Past. I set this up in the studio. It's a value study. I borrowed all these things from a friend whose grandfather was in the orange business, and I set that up. That's a value study for that, and I'll have to show you the finished piece of work. This is done in pencil. Another one that I did, this was done with an instructor from Italy, and we were in Canada at Calgary University working on this. This is a William Bouguereau painting. This is an old master method of painting the same way. I did the same thing. Underpainting, a wash study, and then there's the colors on this particular piece of work. Very classical style of painting. We're going to be looking at the idea of how do you create a piece of artwork. A lot of people always ask me, where do you get the inspiration from these things? Well, I get the inspiration from life, and I'm going to spend a long time talking on that. But most of the ideas I do these days come out of experiences, come out of people's relationships, come out of many things. Right now I've been working underwater for the last 3-4 years, and I'm having a blast underwater. I was talking earlier about the fact that it was a grandson who had taken some of these pictures with his GoPro, and he had sent them, and they were really great pictures. This is what it looks like, very, very shallow in a mangrove area, where you've got roots that go underwater. He was underwater here, very shallow, 3-4 feet of water. Let me show you a top. That's the top of mangroves. Well, this is the underwater part of the mangroves when you put all these together. So you've got the above and you've got below. Now what I'm going to do, mangroves are something that grows around the state of Florida. We have a lot of mangroves around coastal areas, a lot of fish, and they're great estuaries where all kinds of marine life is found. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take several pieces. I love the depth of this particular one. There's light drawn into, there's weight here. The weight on this side I particularly like. It's an asymmetrical type of a balance. I'm going to use that and combine this. Now you don't see it right now on these two pictures. They don't look like they go together. I'm going to combine them together. So that's what I normally would do with pencil and sketches and everything. We're going to bypass all that. I'm going to go right onto the canvas and paint it. The other thing that I'm going to be doing is, there's the redfish. That's a real redfish because we also ate him. But son-in-law caught this one. He had him laying up on the counter to get ready to clean him. He was teaching another grandson how to clean a fish. That's a redfish. A lot of these fish are found in those kind of environments. So this redfish is typically looking for food in oysters or down in the mangroves. He's going to be, in this particular painting, chasing a mud crab. So I'm going to have him coming around the mangroves, and a mud crab's going to be with his claws up in the air. Don't have the mud crab right this second, but anyway, that's the reference I'm going to be using. I'm going to be combining a bunch of photos, but I'm going to be using a creative idea that's real to what happens down here. All right. What I'm wanting to do with these pieces of artwork are to combine them in such a way that all the principles would be there if it was one shot or if I was underwater looking at that scene. The weight and the movement, there's a movement and a shape that's formed right here. That movement, it's also balanced by weight from the shadow that comes underneath it and then the light that's behind it. That's a strong feature of design. I'm going to combine these over top of them because I have a redfish that I want to be particularly coming out of here and coming around. That's why I chose this piece with a head turn. He's going to be coming back around those mangroves and the crab's going to be down here. So those are the strong features that I've chose these three photos for. That's why I'm using them. This is the terpenoid that's in this little jar, and I'm going to add it to a burnt umber. So if you see when it says wash, it's because it's very washy. It's almost like a watercolor. And the liquid is also a way to transparently thin it down even more. But once I mix that liquid to this, that will begin to dry onto this stone top. In about 2 to 3 hours, that'll be really hard. I'll have to scrape it off. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and get some major features. Again, I'm looking for weights, I'm looking for movements. I have certain elements that I want, as I was explaining to you, that I think are a strong point for this piece of work. Everything I'm needing isn't here. I'm going to have to work that. And that's going to be important as I get this piece moving. And like I said, this is really, really washy. And what makes that so wonderful is that I don't have any exact shapes I'm trying to define necessarily in the beginning. And I can do I can move things around a lot. And that's what makes this great. It's a big mass value study if you want to get technical. That's what I'm going after. And it could even be drippy and runny. At this point, it doesn't make that much difference. It's that I get paint on it. And I've got the contrast between the darks and the lights. And eventually I will come back in here and that will look very, very luminant back in here. And at that point, I may bring in a lighter value of my background tonal canvas. This is a technique that I use a lot. It's called scumbling. It's almost like drawing with the pencil, and it's the way I paint a lot. It tears up your brushes, but I'm not worried about the brushes. I'm really more enjoying the experience and the effects I can get from this method of painting. So this is the weight again. There's a big massive weight. It counterbalances off by this shape that comes through here. So there's a move that sort of fits together between the lights and the darks. It's a little bit unusual to do one of these in the beginning because it feels like you don't even know what you're doing. But after you get it going, you'll see it begin to take shape. It's almost like sculpting with kind of clay. because you start out really thin, but it'll get very heavy. And the more you paint it, especially with this particular medium, coming in here a little bit more, and I'll use that a little bit more as I kind of get going, because it'll start sticking up the painting and drying it faster than I probably want right now. My main job is to get the feel of this thing moving in an area. I'll lose a little bit right here. To get this thing looking like it's going somewhere in a hurry. There's ways you can lift color off. Right now we got to get paint on before we lift anything off. I'm going to show a couple of specific techniques of how that's going to be done. Now I could get a bigger brush, but it kind of ruins the whole drawing experience in my opinion. And I'm liking the idea and the feel. That's about a third of the way over, but I do want to extend from that other photograph here. But I do like the shape of that down in here. I do need some design features. This is a small one on that mangrove that's broken. I like that. And we will really define it. It's a little bit strange because most classical art, you do so much finished work underneath it. In this particular case, we're using a very contemporary method, but we will finish it. It will be finished before we put color on. And you'll know exactly, I'll know at least, well, in this painting, exactly where I'm painting and what's going on. I have a little bit of time, not too much, because I have thinner and I have a fast drying medium. Both of those make the paint dry fast. So it's not like I have tremendous amount of time, and I'm using a very thin brush. This is a sable, and I happen to like sables. I painted with watercolors for years, so this method of painting to me is not even foreign. It's almost like painting in watercolor, which I thoroughly enjoy because there's a lot of drawing involved. And you can see the weight up here. You're looking up like that ceiling there. You're looking under, up, and to below eye level, looking up above eye level. That's the edge of a root on the water. That's some seaweed that's kind of floating around in there. This is a really interesting design. Those roots are, to me, worth trying to capture. There's a lot of movement in the roots. As simple as this painting might seem, it isn't. But that'll come about as I continue to shape it. Now remember, I'm just using one color paint, but we can take that paint to thin all the way to the absolute thickness that I can put on there, but I'll do that as I progress the painting. That little move right here and those little edges coming around, I'm going to pick up on those little guys there eventually. Right now I just want to rough them in, kind of get them going. You're looking at just the edge of that piece of water as you look up.
Okay.
Okay, you can see how this has progressed along. The main, what's called a mass value, and a lot of times this is called a shape. It's like a puzzle piece, one big piece of value. Even though they're light and dark, it's still considered to be a pattern, one big giant pattern. And so I know it's hard to think like that. Most people don't think in big mass value patterns, but it's something that if you can learn to think that way, it makes your painting work quite well and quite fast. I'm capturing that whole move. I was telling you about that little circular move here too. I'm not going to get overly detailed, but there's a whole movement here. Comes up, goes around, and this is the feel of it right here. And I'm going to go after that as a big feature of the design of this. Now right now, I'm painting only with one brush. I'm going to pull out some other brushes and show you what you can do with this. Here, specifically, I already kind of started. This is called lifting. Now, I've got that damp from the Turpenoid. And you can see right now, because my brown is very wet, I can lift those colors all the way to the back of this tone, and it gives the feeling of the light. That's an important feature that I'm going to go after in the beginning construction on several parts. The Italians actually would take rags or paper towels and they would wipe out. So it's called wiping. I happen to be using a technique in watercolor we call lifting, where I'm lifting off the, or lifting up of the paint. So I'm going to pull up a few little features like that, just slightly. What you don't want to do in the beginning at stages like this, you don't want to over-define anything. The definition's going to come as a whole. You're working the whole together. You're working it as a whole. You're not working into individual detail. And that's the hardest thing for a lot of people to get hold of. So anyway, back to this idea, I'm going to keep moving along, adjusting my values, adjusting my lights and my darks, using some of these techniques to begin to get a feel for the piece of work. As it settles, I'll come back and continue to build heavy. This is fairly heavy on the paint out of the tube. And what's so marvelous about that is that'll stay wet for quite a while. It'll be a lot wetter than the thin paint. The technique that we're using is thin to thick. That's how we paint colors also. We're going to go thin to thick, dark to light. That's the method. So you might want to jot that down, or at least mentally take a note of it, because it's an important method in the painting. Okay, one of the things that I didn't really talk about, I probably should have a little bit, so I'll do it now. I have one little edge that would contradict what I'm about to tell you, but there's no sharp edges to anything. I'm painting, even to do a limb like this, I'm not cutting sharp edges. I'm painting like this on purpose. You see that? As this begins to dry more, I can come back and build heavier paints on, and that's what I'm starting to do right now. Another technique that I did want to show you, I talked to you about it, it's this idea where there's a little bit of turpenoid on my brush. You can take a paper towel, and that is called wiping. So you can lift the paint off by wiping it out, or you can do it with your brush. That's a very effective technique. Another one is, I am not only by building heavier and heavier, this is almost straight paint in here. If I was painting and I'm if I'm painting over here somewhere and I need paint, I could even lift from this heavy paint, borrow from that. So it's like borrowing, and I could come over here and put it down. The main thing is that you're getting paint on, and the more that you get the paint on, the more that you can begin to shape it. And it will begin to take shape a little bit at a time. And these techniques are all important techniques for doing that. I'm going to just lift that edge off right there again, see? And I'm going to leave it. So you are drawing and painting and shaping. It almost feels dimensional to me to paint this method. It's slow. It happens really slow, but it does happen. Two things I'm beginning to do. Didn't talk about it at the beginning either. Down here there's a napkin. I have that on purpose because I'm wiping my brush to the desired amount of fluid I want on the brush. There's a lot of sensitive control with painting. This method of painting, you're controlling the thinness, the thickness, the wetness, the dryness. All those things are essential. Another thing is I hold in my hand another paper towel, and I'm going to even further adjust how much I want on, how much I want to take off. I told you before we weren't really defining anything with sharp edges. I'm now beginning to come back, and I'm going to start determining where the roots go and where the shadows are going to go. This sand here
is still a bit wet, I'm going to soften it down. I'm going to try to get it on here where I've got a little bit of light and dark variety in it. But I'm going to start putting some shapes in the sand. You can see this one is beginning to come right here where there's depth. But it's not a flat ground. There's shape on this ground. There's light that's filtering down, hitting in between the mangroves, hitting on to the bottom of the floor of the Gulf there. There's a light coming out this hole. This is that movement I was telling you about that I'm working on. But anyway, when I'm done with this, you still get that one major big feel of dark here. I was telling you about this big pattern. And we're shooting out to the light. I've left this light on purpose. Tried not to paint too much of it out. And as soon as I get this one section done in this one top section, I'm going to go on further to a little bit more definition. As it dries, you can come back and then begin to put darker values on it, or darker, more heavy, actually it's only one value is brown, but you can put heavier brown umber on it, and as it begins to dry, you have to know that. You have to feel it. It'll dry, and as this whole process dries out, you're actually then refining and shaping, and almost like I said, I feel like a sculptor sometimes, like I'm sculpting this out in one color.